Hi everyone, I wanted to take a minute to talk about language in this class. So, not even just in this class, but in your professional lives as well. So, whether you're a special educator, you're a speech language pathologist, wherever you might be within the disability community, this is important information to have and to talk about and be very, very aware of. Um, so, in school, we are always taught to say person first language or to use person first language. So, student with autism. Lily has autism. So, we are not defining the person by their disability, it is just this characteristic that they have. However, in the last 3 to 4, maybe even 5 years, there has been a very strong but steady push towards using identity first language. So that student is autistic. Johnny is autistic, right? So these are very different. They're opposite, is what they truly are. We have had We've been taught to use person first language for so long that I will literally see students cringe when they hear autistic student use, because it is just something we've been told not to do. We've been told is disrespectful. And so we don't want to be disrespectful to anyone ever. So we try very hard to stay away from that. But it's really important to listen to the disability community, and their needs change and their wants change and their preferences change. And we need to be a little less rigid than we are being surrounding this language, and we need to listen to the community around us. And so I think listening is really key here. So there is a very, very, very vocal sect of the autistic community that prefers identity first language. So I am autistic. I am an autistic is what you will hear often. So there are those preferences. Then there are also kind of the I can go either way. So I have a brother who's on the spectrum, and I've asked him many times, which one do you prefer? And he says he doesn't care. It makes no difference to him. And so you can use whatever kind of language you want to describe him, just as long as you are treating him with respect. And then there is the person with autism, so your person first language. What I am finding most often is that parents of an autistic student will prefer person first language. They do not want autism to define their child, and I get that as well. However, we are not really we're not listening to parents, but the priority of who we are listening to is the person themselves. So for our students that can't really advocate for themselves, that are not as verbal, that are higher support need and can't really say what they need to say, or say they have difficulty advocating for themselves verbally, I think it's important that we listen to their parents when it comes to a lot of things, but we listen to the disability community on the whole when it comes to things like language. So if the overwhelming priority seems to be on using identity first language, that's what we should use if someone is not advocating for themselves. Now, I work in a world where I see a lot of parents and I see a lot of autistic people. And so I try and float somewhere in the middle, and I say person on the spectrum. So you will hear me say person on the spectrum most of the time. I will occasionally say autistic. I will sometimes still say person with autism out of habit, even though I'm trying not to do that at this point. But I will say person on the spectrum. No one has ever had a problem with that, and I think that's the way I personally will go for a while. Now, I am a very research-oriented person, and so I wanted to see if there was any research on this. So I'm going to start with an anecdote first. So I am a peer reviewer for a number of journals. I just started reviewing for a journal called Autism in Adulthood, and all of the language in the manuscripts I was reading were autistic person, so identity first. And that's really the first time I had seen that in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. So I went through their author guidelines, and they prefer authors using identity first language, which I think is great. I think it's a choice, and I'm glad that they did that. So they actually have a clause in here that while preferences range, their board prefers autistic, and you can also use a more neutral term, which I felt very validated rather when I saw this. You can use person on the spectrum as a neutral term. They also have a section here on anti-ableist language, which is great. So another one that I use, I guess academically, is comorbid. So autism and anxiety are often comorbid conditions. And so they suggest that you say co-occurring rather than comorbid. So that's a change that I've made in my vocabulary that I think is a good change. I also found, this is kind of what put me on the side of I should really be more mindful of my language. It's an article in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. So this is a very prominent journal in this field, and it was published in January 2021. It is titled, and I'm going to put it up here in a second, Does Language Matter? Identity First versus Person First Language Use in Autism Research, a response to Vivante, which was another article that was previously published. So I'm going to summarize it for you real quick. They have found that the research is mixed. However, person with autism, so person first language, is overwhelmingly offensive at this point. And so they suggest not using person with autism, but anything else is really okay. And again, they place person on the spectrum as the neutral term. So I would go with autistic or person on the spectrum at this point. And all of that to say, there's no right or wrong answer in this class. If someone says autistic, great. If someone says person on the spectrum, great. If someone is still saying person with autism because that is what's said in their school and that is the culture there and that's what's in their head right now, that's fine too. This is just something to be aware of, that we need to be way more flexible around language than I think we typically are. And so I'm going to step off my soapbox now, and I hope this was helpful for y'all.